Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of I Foresee Trouble with Daly and Wallace. They say that a week is a long time in politics. Well, 2 weeks is a lifetime, and there are many things we could talk about today. There was the appalling ruling by the British Court of Appeal, which upheld the prosecution of the Palestinian Action activists and their imprisonment for breaking into the Elbit Systems plant. We've had a brewing war at the top of the European Union with Kaya Kallas under the spotlight. And let's remember, all 27 member states voted for her, but now her position is looking a little bit rockier with von der Leyen in the wings waiting for a takeover. And of course, in Ireland, we had the devastating pogroms which were meted out to migrant communities, orchestrated and organised by loyalist factions as a result of a terrible attack on a man which happened to be carried out by a mentally ill Somalian. But in any case, we can't talk about any of those because the reason why we were absent last week is our co-host here, Mick, has just returned from Iran. And obviously Iran now is again in the news. It's never left it, but it's particularly there now with talk of the bones of a peace deal. But Mick had the opportunity to be there for 9 days. He's back, fresh, well, not really fresh, tired, but reinvigorated from an incredible experience to be in a country, in the middle of that country, defending itself from a war of aggression. And I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but I mean, you'll never be the same person again after being there, I would imagine. But first thoughts or reactions to the trip?
Yeah, 9 days. It was like 9 months. It was just strange coming home. It was an incredible experience, an incredible opportunity to be out there, and we were there while the Americans were bombing the place. It was really, it was an incredible experience. It's hard to talk about it in some ways. So much went on. There was so much happening the whole time, and it was a crazy schedule. I didn't sleep much over there. There were long days and a lot of traveling between different places. I mean, I suppose I could go through.
I think at this stage it might be useful for you to highlight some of the places that you went to and some of the people that you met. I know you did, as you say, travel a lot of ground geographically. It's a huge country. Many different parts, many different feelings, but getting that overall sense of resilience and strength that kind of screamed out from everything you've told me about the trip. But I mean, it started, I think, in a university in Tehran.
Yeah, I mean, I arrived on Tuesday evening, and there was, we had few hours to talk about things with the Iranians. I was one of 6 that were invited for this sort of an opportunity to kind of see how things were in Iran, I suppose, right? Now, it turned out the other 5 were journalists, which I wouldn't classify myself as a journalist, but there were good people. They were from Austria, from Tunisia, Ukraine, Lebanon, and Pakistan.
Georgia.
Or Georgia, not Ukraine. I know, I've had to make that mistake a couple of times. Georgia, and sorry, Georgia. Georgia and Ukraine are very different,
Yeah,
and I'm very fond of Georgia. But anyways, on the Wednesday morning, we were an early start, and the first place we went was to a university that had been bombed by the Americans called Shahid Beheshti University. It's actually one of the most famous universities in the world, which I hadn't heard of. It was a real symbol of Iran, and that's why the Americans hit it. They were famous for doing research on plasma and laser, and they actually discovered their own vaccine for COVID during the COVID crisis. But the also there were 4 different missiles hit the university. And people should understand that in the 40-day war in February, March this year, the Americans and the Israelis bombed 31 universities. Now you wonder, why are they bombing universities? But I mean, and I couldn't help thinking all the time about the fact that the Europeans weren't condemning what the US and the Israelis were doing. They couldn't condemn the initial attack, which was illegal, and they couldn't condemn all the terrible atrocities that happened over the 40 days. But we had a guy, he was actually secretary of the Iranian UNESCO mission, Dr. Hassan Fortouzi, and he gave a speech outside the ruins of the university, kind of telling us how important this university was to Iran and the world. And they were, they don't understand why people would bomb a university. And just to put things in context, in the 40-day war, there was 3,400 plus civilians in Iran killed by US and Israeli bombing. Iran were bombing Israel and the Gulf states in retaliation. Gulf states with American bases being used to attack Iran. In the total figure that I had seen, and this was after the war had ended, the total figure I had seen for deaths in these countries that Iran was bombing was 29 people. In contrast to 3,400 plus civilians killed in Iran. But that's not something the Europeans condemned either. We went from there to Gandhi Hospital, and I think people would have seen that. It was very much in the news. It's the top IVF hospital in Iran, which is in vitro fertilization. Is that what it stands for? Mm-hmm. And there was actually 150,000 embryos stored in the hospital. But this hospital was targeted as well. And people should know that in the 40 days, the US and Israel bombed 307 medical facilities in Iran. 307 different medical facilities, and Gandhi Hospital was one of the more prominent ones of them. We went from there to Rezalat in East Tehran. It's a completely residential area, working class area, absolutely zero military dimension in the region, packed residential housing. There was over 200 civilians killed in, and they literally obliterated a block of apartments. Or I'm talking about, there's a space that you could build nearly 2,000 apartments back in. They're clearing it at the moment, and while we were there, but the whole block was wiped out. It was incredible to see.
I mean, it must have been very interesting. I mean, the rest of us who've looked on in kind of horror from afar, to actually see the deliberate targeting of medical facilities, of educational facilities, of residential areas, to see it concretely, really exposes the lies. And when you posted some of the footage from the professor speaking outside that world-famous university, it kind of struck me the similarities with Cuba, that here you have countries trying to use their intellectual resources to benefit humanity, for better health, for better welfare for citizens, and the reward for that is that those facilities are the ones that are absolutely targeted, which are actually war crimes, really. And I think we would encourage people to look at your Twitter to see some of the feeds that you made of the various reports there as well, because it is quite striking how the victims of this and the targets of this war are ordinary Iranians.
Yeah, and the Iranians kind of struggle to understand the Western approach because from their perspective, it's not something they do. And people should remember that, the Iranian Revolution took place in 1979 when they got rid of the Shah, who was allowing the West steal all the resources, mainly oil, for their benefit, not for the benefit of the Iranian people. But the West done its utmost for years to break the revolution and to destroy it. And one of the things they did was that in 1981, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. Iraq invaded Iran, and Iraq, who wasn't necessarily overly friendly with the West at the time, but the West wanted him to destroy the revolution in Iran, and they backed him. They gave him ammunition, arms, and money, and they gave him chemical weapons. So you had the US and the Europeans and the Gulf states. I mean, you're talking, the world was against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war, which went on for 8 years. There was over 400,000 civilians killed with the chemical weapons, and the Americans and the Germans gave Saddam chemical weapons to use against the Iranian civilians. And Iran had the means to make chemical weapons themselves, but choose not to because it was against their religion. Now get your head around that. They refused to use chemical weapons back in defense against Iraq because it was against their religion. And yet we had the Germans and the Americans giving Saddam all the chemical weapons he wanted in order to kill civilians in Iran.
I think there's a couple of important points in that. I mean, one is, I suppose, as you say, the wonderment by the Iranians as to why the world isn't out in horror about what's going on now, given the civilian targets. But I think it does really show the normalisation of this, which we've referred to before as the world after Gaza. The targeting civilians and medical facilities and educational facilities has become normalised in the world. But I think in part the resilience of the Iranian people is rooted in their relatively recent history of, for example, the Iran-Iraq war. And when we were there before, we would have seen memorials to children killed in chemical attacks and that before, when again the world didn't look. But you had the chance to meet an incredible amount of civilians, both the people on the streets of Tehran out every night, over 100 nights now, in support of the government. And I suppose you got a chance to see the diversity of the Iranian people, from Sunni locations, from Christian locations, from sort of more westernized women, if you want to call it that, out on the streets every time, but also bereaved parents who've recently lost children in the war.
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, that particular night on the Wednesday, now we had been to a new metro station that had been built, and it was dedicated to the Christian Holy Mary, because there's a Christian church across the road from it. And I did a social media post pointing out that von der Leyen and the Europeans were pressuring the Armenians to expel Christian or Russian Orthodox Christians because they were associated with Russia. So the European Union is putting pressure on Armenia to expel Christians from Armenia. And here we have Iran, who has been demonized since 1979 because they challenged Western imperialism. We have them building metro stations to to honor the Christian Holy Mary. Now, I was also in a sunny, a few days later, I was in a Sunni mosque for a few hours and met a whole lot of Sunnis and had a very interesting discussion with them. But I'm the leader of the Sunni community in this particular mosque. It was actually in a place called Bandar Abbas, which is actually beside the Strait of Hormuz, which we'll get to later. But he was pointing out, I was asked to speak and all, and I was pointing out that there was a time when the Shia and the Sunni got on great until the West interfered and set them against each other. And he was at pains. This guy, he was at pains, the Imam, to point out that the Sunni have been 100% with the Shia in defense of Iran. And he says, the only times, he said, when the Shia and the Sunni have disagreed and fought with each other is when they turned their back on the Quran, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it really shows the strength. And of course, Iran has the largest population of Jews, I think, in the region outside of Israel. And many of them, if not all of them, are also on the side of Iran in this as well.
Absolutely. And if you remember, in the 12-day war last year, one of the first things the Israeli bombed in Tehran was a synagogue. Yeah. A synagogue, right? But yes, you're right. Iran has the largest Jewish community in the whole of Asia outside of Israel. Yeah. And you would think, listening to Western media, that Iran was trying to destroy Jews everywhere. Iran hasn't been fighting with Jews. It's been fighting with Israel, which is a Zionist settler colonial project. And people who associate what Israel is doing with Jews are being totally disingenuous and unfair to the Jewish community across the world, who many of them have turned their back on Zionism. But anyway, that particular night, we went to one of the squares. You want to see the hundreds of thousands of people on the streets every night. There's huge squares in Iran, almost round, but not quite. Incredibly huge squares at big junctions on roadways and everything. They are black with people. And we went to Tajish Square, which is a famous square, and the place was jammers, right? And they asked me would I like to speak, and I said, of course. Right? So
surprise.
They had a stage and all, and the mic system, the whole lot, and they got me a translator. Amazing. And it was a wonderful opportunity to speak to the people, and what an atmosphere.
And of course, you saw many different types of people, like this image of Iran created abroad of this authoritarian society and the repression of women that all we hear, which the women were loud and clear in every sort of garb and outfit you could imagine, standing behind their country, you know. Yeah,
and I'll tell you what now, I should have made some videos, because I can safely say at this stage that I'd say 9 out of 10 young women are not wearing any headgear.
But they're out in their protests in the face of US bombardment.
Yeah. And the ones that are wearing it out of choice. I mean, the amount of rubbish that we listen to in the European Parliament.
But you also, I think there, or certainly later on, you had the very humbling experience of meeting parents who recently lost their children.
Well, in that night in Tajish Square, after getting off the stage, there was a woman wanting to talk to me. I should remind our audience as well that just after getting off the square, this young fella, I'd say he was about 19, right? He comes up to me and he says, please, he says, accept this as a present from me. And he said, he says, and here's 2 presents for Claire Daly.
I didn't get them yet. I'm reporting you to him, but right. No.
But I mean, I said, what? Yeah. And he had perfect English, right? Just a young chap from Tehran. But then there was a woman wanting to talk to me, and she had lost her 10-year-old daughter in the bombing of the school in Minab, which we went to a few days later. And I mean, she was there with her friend, and she had a picture of her daughter, and her daughter was a champion gymnast. It reminded me of my granddaughter, who was also in
Champion gymnast.
a champion
Aspiring
gymnast.
one,
Yeah. So look, it's.
Well, what was she saying to you? Or
Well, I'll
just,
tell you what.
Yeah.
She was talking about what happened and what it was like at the time when they got the news and that kind of thing, right? I mean, it was just harrowing to listen to, right? But she after about 20 minutes or half an hour, she says to me, she says, "Will you bring one message back to Europe for me?" And I said, "Sure." She says, "What's that?" She says, "I want you to say to the European mothers that this could have been your child." And I says, "Think about that," she said. "This could be your child."
It's a powerful message, and one that would resonate, and I think we've seen that in the solidarity around Europe with Mothers Against Genocide in Ireland, and that a powerful gathering of just ordinary women with kids who exactly get that point that, you know, first they come for the Gazans, then the Yemenis, then the Lebanese, then the Iranians, and then there's no one left. And this is a global campaign, if you like, and that's why the solidarity has to be global. But you went down to Minab. I don't want to jump around in your order, but seeing as we're on Minab,
I mean, listen, we have near enough time to talk about it all, but so I'm really just touching on different parts.
You were down in the school.
Yeah, but just the day after Tajish, after being in Tajish Square, we went to the shrine to Khamenei, the first spiritual leader, and we also went to Behesht Zara Cemetery, where most of them. It's the biggest graveyard in Tehran. It has over 700 acres of land, 750 acres of land, which is an incredible size, right? And it's where most of the martyrs are buried. And when I was there, I met one young woman in particular. I met loads of people there, but there was one young woman, and she had perfect English, and she was standing with her mother at her father's grave. And he was killed in the 12-day war last summer, and they were visiting the grave. And she was holding a child in her arms, and I asked her, was it her child? And she says, no, she said, this is my brother. This woman now is about 25, but she says, my brother was born after my father was martyred. And she says, and there's my mother. Right? And I met the mother, and she says, there's something I don't understand, she says. She says, why are the Europeans silent about what US and Israel are doing to us and the way they've targeted residential areas and hospitals and whatever? She says, they've been trying to kill as many people as possible. She says, why aren't the Europeans saying something? She says, I don't understand that, she says. We thought the Europeans were good, she said. And can you explain it to me, she said. And I tried to explain to her, and there's actually somebody, I didn't even realize it at the time, but somebody was making a video of it. And so I actually put the video up on social media, a piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. I just put up about a minute of it, right? But I was just trying to explain to her that while the politicians and mainstream media in Europe refused to condemn the illegal US-Israeli invasion of Iran, they refused to condemn the bombing of civilians. They even refused to condemn the bombing of Minab school. I said, I'm sorry that they support Zionism. They are puppets of Western imperialism. they don't have sovereignty themselves in their own countries because they're subservient to the Americans. But I said, you need to understand, I said, that the people of Europe, I said, are in a different place. And I said, if you look at Palestine, and she had mentioned Palestine, and she said, there was a genocide in Gaza, she says, and the Europeans supported it. And I said, yes, I said, but the people of Europe didn't, I said. The politicians and the media did, but the people of Europe, I said, 90% of the people of Europe did not support the genocide in Gaza, I said. The politicians and media did, but not the ordinary people. And there's a difference, I said. And I said, in terms of Iran, I said, there's also a difference. I said, the general public, I said, had been so poisoned and lied to for so long by Western media and the politicians since 1979. I said, it's still a work in progress, I says, to get the truth to the people of Europe. And I said, because a lot of them don't understand what's happened in Iran. And they don't understand that Iran is being punished for having the audacity to stand up against Western imperialism, to actually stand up and fight for sovereignty and its own independence, rather than to roll over to suit financial interests in the Western world. I said, a lot of people in Europe still don't understand it, and they've been very critical of Iran over the years. But I said, the truth will out, I says, in time. But I said that's a work in progress.
Well, that criticism has been abated now when they've seen what Iran has been on the receiving end of, and what they've seen how Iran have been able to respond. And critical to that has been their tactic to use the Straits of Hormuz. And you did get a chance to go down there in the searing heat for a couple of hours, 50 degrees and rising.
Oh, well,
that must have been incredible.
We were down there for a couple of days because there was a couple of very significant attacks in the region of Hormuz. In fact, that was the region that was bombed the most, right? And there was a lot of civilians killed in the area. But the first place we went to, we went down in the middle of the night and went straight to a site at 6 a.m. There wasn't much time for sleep, but we went to a place called La Merde, a town with a population of 30,000. The Americans, on the first day, on the 28th of February, they dropped 4 PRISM missiles. Now, you might wonder, what is a PRISM missile? Well, a PRISM missile had never been used in warfare before. They had only ever been tested. And a PRISM missile, each PRISM missile has 180,000 pellets inside it. And the missile explodes before it hits the ground. These missiles are not designed to destroy buildings or military hardware or planes or anything like that. These missiles are designed only to kill people. And they dropped them on civilian areas in La Merde. There was 4 of them dropped in total. And one of them was a totally residential area and also happened to hit a blood transfusion clinic. They dropped one on a sports hall where young girls were playing volleyball. They dropped one on an outdoor soccer pitch where young boys were playing soccer. And they dropped one on a kindergarten. Now, the West did not condemn this, despite the fact that there was plenty of it. The Iranians were very vocal about what had happened at the time. But 4 of these missiles were hit the town of La Merde. La Merde and Iran will not forget this. And people were genuinely shocked that you would drop a missile with 180,000 pellets in it that are just designed to kill people. There was 21 people killed, mostly young people, and 170 badly injured. And we spent most of the day there, right? And, oh God.
I think you have some footage on your social media, and there's a good video that, well, good being the wrong word, but a devastating video that we'll try and put up on the YouTube as well.
It would be good to see.
Because there's been no coverage of this in the West at all.
A local fella made it, right? Now, the Americans tried to make out that there was a military base beside this. I was there. There was zero military activity or base near this area, right? This was 100% residential, but the Americans knew what they were doing. Now, we went to a few other places. Then we actually went to 3 different places in that town that were damaged, and it just, people might find it interesting. The biggest aluminium factory in Iran, one of the biggest in Asia.
Yikes, don't mention aluminium.
Yeah, well,
To our Irish audience who are getting sick of it now at this stage. But
it employs over 20,000 people, and it's just outside this town. Over 20,000 people, but they didn't hit that. They chose to hit a sports hall with girls, young girls playing volleyball, young kids playing soccer, and a kindergarten, but didn't hit the aluminium factory. And God knows they'd have known where it was. But maybe it's because aluminium is badly needed and scarce at the moment. So we bend rules for aluminium, as we know in Ireland as well. I won't go through the other areas I was in that day. But
so did you get to see much, like when you were in the Straits of Hormuz, did you see any Americans or?
No, well, the next day we actually went to the Strait of Hormuz, and that was an incredible experience because the Americans were attacking during the night, and they had killed people in the Strait of Hormuz that night, and some ships were damaged and that kind of thing, and they were obviously wondering, should they let us go out? As we were getting a ship to go out on, a fast boat to go out on the water and to go out and see for ourselves what it was like out there. And we were out there for a few hours. It was incredibly interesting. And
any ships go through on your watch?
There were no ships going through at that time, no. But to be brought out in a fast boat, big boat, to the Strait of Hormuz and see for yourself the actual geography of it was mind-blowing, given that this is the most important stretch of water in the world at the moment. And we saw all these huge ships just parked up, waiting to go somewhere, but obviously being blocked by it. Now, I mean, it was a mind-blowing experience to be in the Strait of Hormuz. And the actual fact, when we got there to go out in the boat, they told us that we were going to have to wait because they decided to change boats because they reckoned the Americans knew the boat that we were going to take and they were getting a boat that would be less identifiable to bring us out. So they switched boats just in case, and which was interesting.
Indeed.
And went out anyway on this boat, and it was just amazing. But it was obviously, we got a lot of information from the Iranians, some of them working in the Strait of Hormuz. The guy that was the captain of the boat, he was telling us about, how, well, first of all, despite all the absolute rubbish from the Europeans and the Americans that this is international water and that Iran has no claim over it, this is actually a lie. Under international law, because of the width of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has every right to call it sovereign territory, and it has every right to monitor the activity in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran's capacity to close the Strait of Hormuz is one of the few reasons that the US and the Israelis had to stop bombing them and stop killing their civilians, because Iran had with the Strait of Hormuz had the world economy by the neck, and they were using it to protect themselves. Now, there's been much talk about whether Iran is going to charge a toll in the years ahead for the Strait of Hormuz. I certainly believe that they would be very stupid not to. If they do, it won't be called a toll. But Iran has costs, and they break them down into environmental, navigation, and services. And while the strait itself, as you were saying, Claire, 12 nautical miles is greater than the strait at the moment, which is around 23 kilometres. But the truth be told, something I didn't know until the captain of the ship told us, that the strait on the Oman side is too shallow for the big ships. So they actually have to come over to the Iranian side anyway to get out. But look at how this will transpire in the so-called peace deal and ceasefire that we're hearing about at the moment remains to be seen. But it's very important for Iran, for their own safety, and in order to put manners on the warmongering the US and Israel, it's very, very important that Iran maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz as leverage to stop the Americans and the Israelis bombing them whenever they feel like it, because that's what's been happening.
Absolutely, and I can't see any conditions or circumstances where they would give that up. But as you say, we hear a lot of talk about the peace deal now, the 14-point memorandum of understanding due to be signed in the coming days, but we won't go into the details of that until maybe next week. And of course, the real detail of it will be whether it's actually implemented. At the moment, it looks like a nice deal for Iran, a walloping defeat for the US, despite whatever way they might spin it. But I think what would be interesting, I mean, you got to talk to a lot of ordinary Iranians. You got to meet a lot of people who've been living through a war, thinking maybe any day now it could be me or my child or my hospital or my workplace. And what's their attitude towards what's going on? Were there any standout conversations for you, taxi drivers, bereaved parents, people on a protest, someone working in a hotel, or just to give people an idea of the psyche and the resilience of the Iranian people, really? You know, how do you survive in the midst of a war like that?
Well, I suppose something that's really central to your question is what happened in Minab school. Minab is a 3-hour drive from the Strait of Hormuz, where we were in Bandar Abbas, which is on the strait. And we drove to Minab the next day after being in the strait. And it has become clear now that this was on the very first day of the invasion, the 28th of February. The US bombed Minab school for small kids. And they killed 133 small boys and girls. And there was 168 in total, because they bombed it 3 times. They went back to get the teachers, they went to get back to get the rescuers, and they went back to get the parents. Three taps in total. There was no military facility near the place, and the Americans know it. It was deliberate. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy the morale of the Iranian people. Now, I've often said, you encounter politicians in Western Europe or anywhere, and when they haven't read history, it's a big problem. Because if you don't understand where we've come from, you don't really understand where you are. Or I would say you don't even understand who you are. History is incredibly important. And for the Iranians, for the Americans and the Israelis to think that they could break Iranian morale by slaughtering their children, they just don't know much about Iran. Iran is over 5,000 years old. It was Persia for thousands of years first. Nobody in 5,000 years has got the better of the Iranians or the Persians. Many have tried. The Iranians don't understand or know how to surrender. And they will eat grass and watch their economy go down the tubes before they'll surrender to Western imperialism and the Zionist settler colonial project. They don't know how to give in. And we listen to parents in Minab school. It's difficult to talk about it. But when the explosion happened and the word went around straight away it was the school, a lot of the parents ran to the school to see was their child okay. All the children weren't killed in the first blast. 133 children were killed, boys and girls, all under the age of 12. One parent spoke about going into the school and saw the destruction and the bodies everywhere, but there were still some children alive. And he found his daughter. And she was slightly injured, but she was fine. And he picked her up and he carried her out outside the site of the school. And he said, "Stay there. I'll be back." He went back into the school to help other children. By the time he came back to his own daughter, she had been killed with the second strike.
Yeah. This is your US Zionist war for you. And
there's one child, and she hasn't been found. All they have is her school bag and one shoe.
yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it reminds me when we were in the school in Syria and something similar. A suicide bomber came to this school, which was famous in Homs for teaching children of many different religions. It was a Shia school, but everybody, Christians, Alawite, everybody was in it. And the suicide bomber bombed themselves outside the school. Whole families of children were wiped out. And like that, they came the second time when parents and rescuers were there. And when we were there, it was a couple of years on, and the teacher was a absolutely wonderful woman. And they had created a museum kind of, or an exhibition at the bottom of the school, out of the rubble of the destruction, recycled out of the devastation, sort of messages of hope and anti-war. And I think the message from the people in Minna clearly is that it's an obviously devastating personal blow for the people involved. It's an attack on people and humanity everywhere. But rather than breaking them, I mean, it's obviously personally devastating, but these things have made them stronger, and they are not going to roll over or allow a world to exist where such behaviour is normalised and is allowed to happen without condemnation or commentary from the world. And it's a powerful and devastating testimony.
I mean, something that we probably don't understand in the West, but I was in a few different graveyards, cemeteries, and I've met a number of parents who lost children. And something that's hard for us to fathom is this concept of martyrdom, because they 100% genuinely believe that those killed by the invading enemy are martyred and will always live. And it's like as if their children are just a part of Iran forever. It's really hard to explain. You know, I mean, we seen some parents turn up to the school just as we were leaving, who were just coming and crying their heads off, trying to deal with their grief. It's incredibly powerful.
And I mean, we have, I suppose, seen, you see it a lot in countries we've been in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and so on, pictures of martyrs, people who've lost their lives. And I suppose in some ways it's been a way of life in that region because of Western interference for so long. And I remember the first time we went to Iran in about 10 years ago now, for a conference on Palestinian solidarity. And one of the things the Iranians at that time were very glad that they weren't like Syria and Palestine in these countries, that they valued a lot their strength. And of course, it's been now come to their door, and they're not going to allow this to happen. They've all rallied around now, the government and so on. Absolutely, they're paying a devastating price for it. But I'd imagine the feeling of people is, right, that's it now. The gloves are off, in the sense of they're doing their worst, and we will not bow to this.
Yeah, I mean, people, they're all very conscious of the fact that a huge amount of damage has been done in Iran, a terrible loss of life, terrible destruction. They reckon that the amount of destruction will cost about 500 billion to replace. The Iranians don't have much money, and getting the finance from the financial world will be very difficult from anybody. People don't part with their money too easy, and it's a huge challenge. And I spoke about this with a few people, and I mentioned to you one of them was a taxi driver. I was only in one taxi in my time out there. Just for the record, right down around the Strait of Hormuz and Bandar Abbas, it was 51 degrees. Now, 51. I mean, I have been in warm places, right? But I haven't been in 51 like this before. It was incredible heat. And that's all that area around the Strait of Hormuz is so hot at this time of year. And they're saying that it's not the hottest time yet. So
Hope the taxi driver had air conditioning, had he?
one fella says, we only have 2 seasons in Hormuz. One of them is summer, and the other one is hell. But speaking of the taxi driver, I got into this taxi with Saber, who was one of the coordinators, and Saber had perfect English, and I said to Saber, I said, I love talking to taxi drivers, right?
Don't we are listening to them?
You have to listen most of the time. But I said to Saber, I said, ask him he's going to watch the football when Iran are playing. And he says, and Saber says to me, I'll ask him, he says now, but he says, just telling you now, he said, not all Iranians are into football. Some of them are. He says, not all of them. But he'll tell you what they're all into, he said. Every one of them, he says, could talk politics all day to you. Every one of them are fanatical about politics, and they never stop talking about it, he says. And that's all Iranians, he said. Now, some of them like the football. I said, but ask him, is he going to watch the match? And he says, yeah, well, yeah. And so I said, right, okay, let's talk about politics. Mm-hmm. So I said, does he think that Iran should be working for a ceasefire with the US and Israel? And his answer was no. He says, we need to keep fighting. And I asked him, why does he think that? And he asked him, and he said, because he says they deliberately kill children, he said. We must keep fighting these, he says. They deliberately kill children. They're child killers.
Well, you do get that sense, we've made it from the beginning. It's an existential threat for Iran, and they have to keep going. They're not going to bend to this. And in fairness, and to the joy of many, the overwhelming majority the world over, they seem to have done pretty well despite all of the devastation that you've outlined. And it was nice to see the Iranian football team being cheered by the Mexicans on their way to Los Angeles, and to see the tremendous response that they got in that much tainted, disgusting organisation that is FIFA and the World Cup. But yeah.
And the reception in the stadium last night, they drew with 3 o'clock this morning. They played New Zealand, and it was a 2-2 draw. And I saw a clip from the stadium of the people cheering for Iran. It was heartwarming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Given that this is the first time ever in the history of the World Cup where a country was playing and they weren't allowed to stay in the country where the games were being played. This is the first ever. It's obviously been driven by the Americans, and it's been facilitated by a totally corrupt and rotten FIFA, the world governing body of football, who are nothing short of a total disgrace. And we'll talk about them another day. But the Irish Sea is not deep enough for the governing body of FIFA.com.
Absolutely. And look, it has been an intense episode, and maybe we will leave it at that for today. We will return to your visit if there's any particular questions people would like to ask or get information. Send them on to us. We'll deal with that during the week. We'll be back within the week with a follow-on episode, but we want to draw people's attention, and listeners in Ireland, to an important event that's on at the weekend, Peace and Neutrality Forum in Taylor's Hall near Christchurch in Dublin, starting Friday evening at 7 o'clock, and then carrying on Saturday. A lot of diplomatic, international, legal expertise, real expertise in terms of why we need peace and neutrality, and we'd really encourage everybody to get along to that.
And yeah, and listen, and if Simon manages to put up this short video that was made in La Merde, where the 4 PRISM missiles with 180,000 particles in each, designed to kill people, were dropped. There was a short video made the morning after by a local guy who had video gear. So if you see a video, if Simon gets to put it up, it's from La Merde, and it was taken the morning after, and it would make the hair stand on your head.
I think that's important, and again, I refer people to Mick's social media. He was restrained while he was in Iran with it, but there's some good information in that as well. So look, we'll be back to you again next week with maybe some more on Mick's trip to Iran, but certainly the latest issues on the day, and we'll deal with the emerging peace deal at that as well. So thanks very much. Good luck.
All the best.